In this section, we will be talking about how to take your notes and turn them into prose. Now, this section is based on a paper I was preparing for the South Carolina Historical Association, or rather, I should say it's based on how I prepared for that paper. And the South Carolina Historical Association is it's a association of historians in South Carolina, and they have a yearly meeting that I and other Lander historians often attend, and you have to write a paper when you go to one of these conferences, and then you present your paper. Now, you don't necessarily read your paper. In fact, usually you don't, but you need to write your paper because you have to send it then to the chair, the head of the panel that you'll be presenting on. There'll be 3 or 4 other people with you who are presenting, and the chair's job is to make comments that tie together those papers. Usually the papers have some kind of common theme. So you have to send your paper to them ahead of time. And it has to be short enough that you can give a talk in about 10 to 15 or sometimes 20 minutes if you're lucky. So it's comparable to what you would do in, say, a History 499 class, about twice as much or 3 times as much as you would do for History 201. But so that way it's very similar to what you would have to do in those classes. Now, I chose for my topic to write about how one professor in the early 1900s visited Korea at the invitation of the Japanese government, which was trying to colonize Korea, and then he wrote a book about his time in Korea saying how Japan should colonize Korea. And I analyzed his book to see how he used the issue of violence to justify Japanese colonization of Korea. So you can see I tried to limit myself. I knew I couldn't do a whole long paper, but I could look at this book. It's about 500 pages long. So I read the book, and I took notes. I took about 30 pages of notes, and it came out to about 18,000 words. And so, as you can see, I took a lot of notes. And this is just the first page of these notes. And you'll note I clearly identified the chapter number, the title of the chapter, and I have notes, and you'll see I have page numbers, so it's clear what I'm talking about. And you'll also see I have quotation marks. So next, about the 5th line down, you see there's the number 1, then a comma, then a quotation mark, and there is a very long quote, about 5 or 6 lines. And of course, taking lots and lots of notes makes it difficult in a sense to write the paper. It certainly takes longer. However, my hope is that you'll see from this that it saves you time in the long run, and it actually makes your paper a lot easier to write. Now, what I mean about being easier to write, well, once you have the notes, you can just basically just go through your notes and write your paper based on your notes. Now, I have to take a bit of a detour for a moment, though, and explain one thing. If it's possible, it's really great if you have 2 monitors when you do something like this. It may be, I think sometimes you can get a cheap monitor from as low as $50 or up to $100. That is not cheap, but it can help you. So it's possible to hook up your laptop to a monitor so you can have something showing on one screen and something showing on another screen. And that's what I have here, right? You can see, this is a screenshot I took, but it's of my 2 screens. On the left, you can see my outline, and on the right, you can see my notes. And the reason I did that is that it was very easy for me to just copy and paste parts of my notes into another document that formed my outline, right? And if you look closely on the left, you may not be able to quite see it, but don't worry, the next slide I'll show you more clearly. There is a heading that says Queen Min. And what I did was after I had read this book about how this author thought Korea should be colonized by Japan, I found out I was looking specifically for instances of how he tried to use violence to justify that colonization. I found 4 or 5 instances of violence that I thought would work. There was a Japanese invasion of Korea in the 1590s, there was Korean violent resistance to Japan, and there was also the Japanese organized assassination of Queen Min, the Queen of Korea. And so I looked at that. And so what was very easy for me to do then was I was just able to go through those notes, and when I saw something that was connected to Hideyoshi's invasion, I copied it and pasted it over to the heading Hideyoshi's invasion. And then when I saw something about Queen Min, I copy and pasted it over there. So you can see by having those two monitors, it was really easy because I didn't have to keep switching back and forth between documents. I was able just to go to copy and paste it directly without switching between the documents, which is kind of a pain. And that saved me a lot of time. And it also made things really easy because then I was able to kind of get this outline started. So you can see, right, I had a book, I read the book, I took notes on the book, and then I opened this other document, my outline document, and copied and pasted parts of the notes into relevant categories, relevant headings. And that will make your life a lot easier. And here is another example of how that can make your life easier. So if on this slide you can see I use the edit find command to find any place where I wrote down Queen Min. Right, so I was able then, I'm getting the Queen Min section together. I just do the edit find command on my notes from the word processor, and it finds every place where I found Queen Min, where I typed Queen Min. And so that made it very easy to find all those instances. So it's good that if you have keywords. So let's say that you are writing a paper about Jim Jones, and you want to have a section all about the Jim Jones and the People's Temple. And you know about that subject that Congressman Ryan, visited Jim Jones. And that's what actually kind of prompted the mass suicide / murders that occurred there. And you want to write, you're writing about what caused that violence, and you want to have a section on Congressman Ryan. So it's really easy then. All you do is you open up your various documents with the notes in them, and you do an edit find search for Ryan. And then you'll find every instance where he came up. And so that makes then writing these notes, or writing your paper and based on an outline very, very easy. Right? You're able to find this keyword using the edit find command, and then you can paste those sections into your outline section. So on this slide, you can see where I have just made you can see the heading of Queen Min, and you'll see there's the page numbers where I marked down what the author and what the author said on those page numbers. And you can see I've made it clear where the writing is my own, and also I have it clear with quotation marks where it is the original authors. And you can see then, so I've got this heading, I've got the page numbers. Just looking at now all these quotes, I can kind of see how these things go together, right? There's this bit about the, about the gates at the top that talks about how corruption comes in and how the Queen Min, had the heads of her political enemies there. And then in the next section, it says that, these terrible things in the past, they continue. That Koreans have acted badly in the past. This continues. There's all this violence, and then it talks about the murder and the assassination of the Queen. So it puts her into that context. And at the bottom, you can see it says, "This brilliant and attractive but cruel Queen met her own most tragic and cruel death." Quotation marks. And so, in a sense, you can see now I had all these notes, and I put them under this heading Queen Min. And by having them all together, my paper's kind of writing itself, because now I can see that Ladd is drawing this connection, right? He says there's the gates, there's the palace where all these terrible things happened in the past, and things continue to happen badly in Korea. And yes, Queen Min was assassinated, but she had it coming because she was brutal herself. My paper's writing itself, right? This is very easy, but it's because I set the foundation by taking good notes. So if we continue on, then you can see here I've taken my outline and I've added a bit to it. Right, I had the bare facts of the book, but at the top I've added a transition. Another difficult issue is Queen Min. And then I have a line to remind myself to write out who she is in terms of her background, that she was part of the pro-Chinese Min family, that she was very politically skilled, astute woman who used her these skills to oppose Japanese expansion of power following the victory in the Sino-Japanese War. And I have, you can see it's not a complete sentence. I can't think grammatically and historically at the same time. So that's how I do my outline, is I just have the ideas. I then mentioned that I've added my own words. Now I'm going to start going into Ladd, how he tries to make this, connection between the old history of Korea, how it's bad, how Korean queens acted badly in the past, and here's this queen right now who's acting badly, and she kind of had it coming that she was assassinated. So you can't blame the Japanese for that. Actually, that's the reason why the Japanese need to come in to control these terrible Koreans. So you can see then, again, I have a good foundation, and my paper is just writing itself, right? I'm able to think through this very, very easily. And then here you can see a sample where I have actually written it into a paragraph. And I wrote another issue of Japanese violence that Ladd had to deal with is the more recent, the 1896 assassination of Queen Min, following Japan's victory in the Sino-Japanese War, and I give the years. The pro-Japanese party in the Korean court was on the ascendant. However, the conservative pro-Chinese Queen Min and her family opposed them, and the Queen proved herself to be a clever opponent, adept at politics, and able to frustrate the Korean reformers and their Japanese allies. Thus, the Japanese Council Miura, and then you notice I said note, and it's because I couldn't remember his complete name, and I couldn't remember the years that he was alive, and you usually include that information. I didn't want to stop writing because I was kind of on a roll, so I just wrote note to myself to come back to it. And then later I'll use the edit find command to find all those notes and fix them later on. But right now I can just keep rolling. Plot her assassination, which was carried out brutally by a gang of Japanese and Korean toughs who broke in the palace, killed her, and then I couldn't remember who all died. I was like, I have to look that up. And an attendant note to remind myself what it was about, with swords, and then burned her body. Miura would flee for Korea for Japan, and though tried, escaped punishment. So you can see there, right? I had already done my thinking. I had already done my organizing. Now I can actually sit down and write this out. And you can see, though, as I wrote it out, I realized there was some missing information. And I marked those places so later I can come back and fill it in. And here you can see where I actually did go through and fill it in. And I won't read it all over completely. But I just want to note, I found that Miura's full name was Miura Goro. So I included that. And I found out I was actually a little bit wrong. I had misremembered how this went. So I changed that sentence a little bit to reflect it, that it actually isn't clear if any Koreans were involved. It looks like it was just Japanese people. And then I also found out it wasn't just an attendant who was killed. There was 2 attendants as well as the minister of the household. I couldn't remember how they burned her body, and then I found out they did it with kerosene. So I was able to expand on that, right? So you can see how I went from, I just had some notes. I organized those notes into headings. I then went through those headings again and figured out like kind of the connections between them, how all this stuff made sense. And I added transitions. I added an extra background information needed. Then I typed that up into a paragraph, and I didn't worry about making it perfect at first. In fact, even when there were areas I wasn't sure of, I made a note of it so I could come back later. And then I ended up here, and this is, you can see I also added the footnote, and this isn't bad, right? It's still going to need a little bit more work. It's still not perfect, but you can see how it's shaping up. And what's key here, if you follow these steps, it's actually fairly easy, right? It's easy in this kind of thing to be overwhelmed by the amount of facts that you have to deal with. But if you have taken good notes, if you use the edit find command and you organize your notes, especially if you get 2 screens to make an outline, then you can treat each outline as just a separate piece. And you can figure out how they connect together. And that will just make it much, much easier, right? The more you can split up your task into smaller parts that let you just concentrate on one thing, that just makes it a whole lot easier. So I hope this will be helpful to you as you write your papers.